What if, back in 1894, a relatively young Austrian philosopher, just 33, managed to untangle the knot that had stumped Plato, Kant, and seemingly every philosopher who ever lived? More fascinating still, what if his proposed solution could quite literally shift the way you experience consciousness from this very moment onward? For millennia, thinkers have grappled with the so-called mind-body problem. Some prefer the label of dualism versus monism. Frankly, this has driven many a brilliant mind to the brink of despair in the search for a resolution. So, what's the crux of it all? Are mind and matter distinct entities? That's dualism in a nutshell. The concept of physical stuff versus mental stuff fundamentally different. Descartes famously asserted, "I think, therefore I am," essentially proposing a total separation between mind and body. But consider this, if they are separate, how in the world do they interact? What mechanism allows your non-physical mind to instruct your distinctly physical hand to reach for that coffee? Descartes pointed to the pineal gland, but let's be honest, that's less an answer and more a hopeful deflection. You can't just pick a tiny spot in the brain and say, magic happens here, without explaining the magic. The interaction problem killed dualism. Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia actually called Descartes out on this back in 1643, asking him straight up, how can the soul move the body if it's not physical? Descartes basically dodged the question until he died. Nobody's solved it since. Alternatively, maybe it's all just matter. That's materialism for you. Your thoughts, your awareness, even your present experience of reading this, all reducible to neurons firing and atoms bouncing around. Yet, intuitively, doesn't that feel off? When overcome by love or struck by profound insight, is it really just electrons rearranging themselves? Materialists confront what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. Why does it feel like anything to be you? Why does red look red or chocolate taste like chocolate? Even if we map every neuron that fires when someone eats chocolate, we still can't explain the actual experience of tasting it. The subjective nature of consciousness remains unsolved by materialist explanations. Alright, perhaps mind or spirit is the all-encompassing element. This is idealism. Yet why does this table offer such solid resistance when I knock? Why can't I simply will myself through walls? The idealists were forced into some rather strained mental contortions to account for the apparent physicality of the physical world. Berkeley literally argued that things only exist when God perceives them, which, okay, but that's not really solving the problem, is it? Of course, there were those who posited that mind and matter are fundamentally intertwined. Spinoza said they're two aspects of one substance, but this merely pushes the core question back a step. How are they united? What defines their relationship? The underlying explanation remains elusive. You're still stuck with explaining how these two, apparently different things are actually one thing. Enter Rudolf Steiner. Born in 1861 in what is now Croatia, Steiner diverged sharply from the stereotypical philosopher. By the tender age of 8, he was reportedly having direct spiritual experiences. Yet instead of isolating himself as some cave-dwelling mystic, he pursued a technical education, meticulously edited Goethe's scientific writings, and immersed himself in philosophical study. His father was a railway station master, and young Rudolf grew up surrounded by the cutting-edge technology of his time, trains, telegraphs, the whole industrial revolution happening around him. This matters because unlike many philosophers who were purely academic, Steiner had his feet in both worlds, the practical, material world of engineering and the invisible world of thought and spirit. At the Technical University in Vienna, he studied mathematics, physics, chemistry, the hard sciences, but he was also devouring philosophy. Kant, Fichte, Hegel, Schopenhauer, he read them all, and slowly he began to see what they were all missing. In his early 20s, he was asked to edit Goethe's scientific writings for a major new edition. This was huge. Goethe wasn't just Germany's greatest poet, he was also a serious scientist who studied plants, color, and morphology. Working with Goethe's ideas about how nature develops and transforms, Steiner began to form his own revolutionary insights. He realized that all these philosophers were trying to solve the mind-body problem by thinking about thinking, but they weren't paying attention to the actual experience of thinking itself. They were like people trying to understand swimming by standing on the shore and theorizing about water. In 1894, at age 33, Steiner published The Philosophy of Freedom, and in it, he didn't just take another position in the old debate, he showed that everyone had been looking in the wrong place entirely. Steiner's breakthrough seems remarkably straightforward in hindsight, which is often the mark of true genius. He said, "Forget about trying to understand the relationship between mind and matter in general. That's too abstract. Instead, pay attention to the one place where you can actually experience their unity directly, the act of thinking itself. When you observe anything, a tree, a rock, a cloud, there's a fundamental separation. There's you, the observer, and the thing being observed, two distinct entities. Even when you observe your own body, there's still this split, the consciousness observing and the body being observed. Same thing with feelings. When you feel angry or sad or joyful, you can step back and observe these feelings. There's the one who's aware of the feeling and the feeling itself. Still two things. Even in deep introspection, when you're examining your own mental states, there's a split between the examiner and what's being examined. But thinking is completely different, and here's where Steiner's genius shines through. When you think, you're not observing something that exists independently of you. You're creating the thought and experiencing it simultaneously. You're both the author and the reader of your mental content. Let me give you a concrete example that'll make this crystal clear. When you see lightning followed by thunder, you don't directly experience why one follows the other. The sequence is given to you from outside. You need to learn physics to understand that light travels faster than sound. The connection isn't self-evident in the experience. But when you think through why 2 + 2 = 4, really understanding the logical necessity, not just remembering what you were taught, or when you grasp why all bachelors are unmarried men must be true by definition, you're not just recalling information, you're actively recreating the logical connections that make these statements necessarily true. The necessity becomes transparent because you're the one generating the understanding. Or take a syllogism, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore. You don't need to wait to see what comes next. You know it's Socrates is mortal because you're the one making the logical connection. The conclusion isn't coming from outside, you're generating it. Steiner called this the exceptional state, when you turn your attention to thinking itself, and he realized this isn't just some quirk of human psychology or an interesting curiosity. This is the place where the supposed split between subject and object, between mind and world, actually disappears. In thinking, the knower and the known are one. This insight completely demolishes the traditional categories philosophers had been using for centuries. Steiner wasn't saying everything is mind like the idealists. He wasn't saying everything is matter like the materialists. He wasn't even saying everything is both like the dual aspect theorists. He was saying something far more radical. The split itself is something we create when we become self-aware. Think about a newborn baby or a very young child. They don't experience themselves as separate from the world. When they're hungry, there isn't me feeling hunger about food out there. There's just hunger food as one experience. That sense of me in here versus world out there develops gradually as consciousness develops. We literally create the subject-object split by stepping back and observing. It's like how you can't see your own eyes directly. You need a mirror. Consciousness can't observe itself directly, so it splits itself into observer and observed. But this is something consciousness does, not something that is. Critically, and this is where Steiner parts ways with Eastern philosophies that call the world an illusion, this split isn't fake. It's absolutely real as an experience. If you punch a wall, your hand will hurt. The physical world has real effects. The mistake philosophers made was thinking this split was fundamental to reality itself, baked into the structure of the universe, rather than something consciousness does. Think of it like this. When you watch a movie, the separation between you and the screen is real. You're sitting here, the screen is over there, but the movie itself isn't separate from the screen. It is the screen doing something. Similarly, the split between self and world is real, but it's reality doing something, not two separate realities. Steiner's monism says, yes, we experience duality. That's valid, that's real, that's not an illusion to be overcome, but this duality arises within a more fundamental unity. And, here's the kicker, we can actually experience that unity directly through the activity of thinking. When you really think something through, not just have opinions or repeat what you've heard, but actually create understanding through your own mental activity, you're participating in the same lawfulness that governs everything. The laws of logic, mathematics, causality, these aren't just human inventions or cultural constructs, they're the actual structure of reality that we can access through thinking. Now, Steiner goes even deeper. He makes a crucial distinction between ordinary thinking and what he calls pure thinking, or intuitive thinking. Ordinary thinking is mixed up with all sorts of stuff: memories, feelings, personal associations, cultural conditioning. When most people think about, say, justice, their thinking is colored by what they've been taught, their emotional reactions, their personal experiences with fairness or unfairness. Pure thinking is different. It's when you grasp necessary connections directly, without any personal coloring. Mathematical thinking is the clearest example. When you understand why the Pythagorean theorem works, really understand it, not just memorize it, you're not bringing any personal baggage to it, you're actually recreating the logical necessity yourself. Here's what's amazing. You could be the first person in the universe to think through the Pythagorean theorem, and you'd arrive at exactly the same result as Pythagoras did. Why? Because you're not making it up. You're discovering necessary relationships that are true, regardless of who thinks them, or when, or where. But, and this is crucial, pure thinking isn't limited to mathematics. Whenever you truly understand something, why events unfold as they do, how concepts relate to each other, what follows from what, you're engaging in pure thinking. You're touching the universal through your individual mental activity. Take causality. When you really understand why heating water makes it boil, not just memorize heat causes boiling, but actually grasp the relationship between molecular motion, energy, and phase transitions, you're thinking purely. You're participating in the same lawfulness that makes water boil. Steiner calls this capacity intuition, but not in the vague New Age sense of having a feeling about something. He means the direct grasping of ideal content, the immediate apprehension of necessary connections. Just as observation gives us percepts, colors, sounds, sensations, intuition gives us concepts and ideas. And here's the beautiful thing, just as we can train our senses to observe more carefully, a wine taster developing their palate, an artist training their eye for color, we can develop our capacity for intuitive thinking. We can get better at grasping necessary connections, at seeing through to the essential relationships between things. This is where Steiner's philosophy becomes truly revolutionary. If thinking is where we directly participate in universal lawfulness, then when we act from pure thinking, we're truly free. But wait, how can following universal laws be freedom? Isn't that the opposite of freedom? This is where we need to completely rethink what freedom means. Most people think freedom means being able to do whatever you want without constraint. But think about that for a second. If your actions are driven by random impulses, desires, or whims, are you really free? Or are you just a slave to whatever desire happens to be strongest at the moment? Real freedom, Steiner argues, is when nothing compels you except your own understanding. When you act from an insight you've achieved through clear thinking, you're not being pushed by external forces or pulled by unconscious drives. You're acting from your own spiritual activity. Let me give you an example. Say you're walking down the street and see someone drop their wallet. If you return it because you're afraid of being caught on camera, that's not free. You're compelled by fear. If you return it because you were taught, "Thou shalt not steal," that's not free either. You're following an external rule. Even if you return it because you feel bad for the person, you're being driven by emotion. But if you return it because you understand, through clear thinking, that this action maintains the kind of world you want to live in, where people can trust each other, where property is respected, where humans look out for one another, and you choose this understanding as your motive, then you're acting freely. Nothing compels you except your own insight into what's needed. Steiner calls this ethical individualism. It's radically different from both conventional morality and relativism. It's not about following moral rules imposed from outside. That's just obedience, not morality. A soldier following orders to commit atrocities is obeying, but they're not moral. It's not about following your desires. That's just slavery to your lower nature. A drug addict following their craving isn't free, they're enslaved. It's about developing your thinking to the point where you can perceive what's needed in each unique situation and act from that perception. You become a kind of moral artist, creating the right action for each moment through intuitive insight. Here's what's truly radical about this. It means true morality can't be codified into universal rules. Each situation is unique, and only the individual who has developed their capacity for moral intuition can perceive what's truly needed. This isn't relativism, anything goes, or whatever feels right. There really is a right thing to do in each situation, but it can only be found through individual insight, not through applying generic principles. Think about it. Do not lie sounds like a good moral rule, but what about when the Nazis knock on your door asking if you're hiding Jews? Suddenly, the rule isn't so simple. The moral thing to do requires intuitive perception of the whole situation. Or take help others. Sounds good, right? But what if your help enables someone's addiction or prevents them from developing their own strength? Again, moral action requires more than following rules. It requires understanding. This is why Steiner says we need to become moral artists. Just as a great artist doesn't paint by following rules, but by developing such a deep understanding of color, form, and meaning that they can create something new and right for each canvas, we need to develop our moral intuition to the point where we can create the right action for each situation. The highest form of this free action is what Steiner calls acting from love, but he means something very specific and profound by this. When you truly understand something through clear thinking, love naturally arises, not sentimental attachment or emotional infatuation, but love as spiritual desire, the will to help something become what it's meant to be. When a master teacher really understands a student's potential, sees not just who they are, but who they could become, and acts to help them realize it, that's love in Steiner's sense. The understanding comes first through intuitive thinking, and love follows as the will to serve what you've understood. When an artist perceives what a piece of marble could become, sees the form sleeping in the stone, and works to release it, that's love. Again, perception through thinking comes first, then the will to serve that perception. When a parent sees not just their child's current tantrum, but understands the developmental need being expressed and responds to that need rather than just the behavior, that's love. When you understand what a situation truly needs and act to provide it, without thought of personal gain, that's love in its highest form. This isn't separate from thinking, it's thinking fully realized. Understanding and love are two sides of the same coin. The more deeply you understand something, the more you're able to love it properly, and the more you love something, the more you're motivated to understand it truly. Think about anything you really love, a person, an art form, a field of study. Didn't your love grow as your understanding deepened? And didn't your desire to understand grow from your love? They're inseparable. Let's step back and appreciate what Steiner actually accomplished here. This isn't just solving an abstract puzzle that philosophers play with. He fundamentally reframed how we understand consciousness, knowledge, freedom, and morality. First, he showed the mind-body problem is based on a false premise. It assumes the split between subject and object is fundamental to reality, when actually it's something consciousness creates. The problem dissolves when you realize you're looking at a process, not two separate things. Second, he showed we can have direct knowledge of reality, not through mystical feelings that can't be communicated, not through scientific instruments that only give us readings about reality, but through developing our capacity for pure thinking, where we literally participate in the structure of reality itself. Third, he showed genuine freedom is possible, not despite causation, but through understanding causation so thoroughly that we can act from insight rather than compulsion. Freedom isn't the absence of necessity, it's self-determined necessity. Fourth, he showed morality isn't about following rules or desires, but about developing the capacity to perceive what each unique situation requires and having the will to provide it. Ethics becomes a creative art, not a system of laws. Fifth, he showed the path to truth and the path to freedom are the same path, the development of our capacity for pure intuitive thinking. Intellectual development and moral development aren't separate tracks. They're the same process viewed from different angles. This isn't just academic philosophy locked away in ivory towers. If Steiner is right, it changes everything about how we approach life. Your capacity to know truth directly is real. You're not condemned to just believing authorities or trusting secondhand information. Through developing your thinking, you can verify truth for yourself. Not your opinion, not your feeling, but actual truth that anyone else who thinks it through will also find. Your freedom is real, but it's something you have to achieve. It's not given at birth. Babies aren't free. They're driven by needs and impulses. Freedom is earned through the hard work of self-knowledge and clear thinking. Most people live their entire lives without ever experiencing true freedom. Your moral insights matter. You're not just supposed to follow the rules society gives you. You're supposed to develop your ability to perceive what's right in each situation. This is a huge responsibility. You can't just blame your actions on following orders or, "That's how I was raised." Your spiritual development and your intellectual development aren't separate. Thinking clearly is a spiritual activity. Logic and love, properly understood, lead to the same place. You don't have to choose between being smart and being good. They're the same path. So how do you actually develop this capacity? Steiner isn't just philosophizing, he gives practical directions. First, practice observing your own thinking. This is harder than it sounds. Most people are so identified with their thoughts that they can't step back and watch them. But try it. Watch how thoughts arise, how they connect, how you move from one idea to another. Don't judge, just observe. You'll notice thoughts seem to come from nowhere. One moment you're thinking about dinner, the next about your childhood. But if you pay attention, you can catch the connections. Maybe the smell of cooking triggered a memory. Nothing is random in thinking, but the connections are often unconscious. Second, work on thinking things through for yourself. This is crucial. Don't just accept conclusions. Recreate the path that leads to them. If someone tells you democracy is the best form of government or meditation reduces stress, don't just file it away. Think it through. What does best mean? Best for what? Under what conditions? What's the evidence? This is especially important with things you think you already know. Take something simple like, the sun rises in the east. Do you really know this, or do you just believe it? Have you observed it yourself? Do you understand why it rises in the east? Can you think through the Earth's rotation and visualize why the sun appears where it does? Third, notice the difference between thoughts that come from outside and thoughts you actively create. Most of our mental content is borrowed, opinions we've absorbed, memories replaying, emotional reactions. But occasionally, you'll have a thought that's genuinely new, that you've created through your own insight. Learn to recognize these moments. Fourth, practice what Steiner calls living thinking, thinking that connects with reality. Don't just think abstract thoughts. Think through real problems, real situations, real relationships. How does your car engine actually work? Why did your friend react that way? What's really going on in that political situation? Fifth, pay attention to those moments when you have a genuine insight, when something suddenly makes sense, when connections become clear. That aha moment. That's intuitive thinking happening. The more you notice and value these moments, the more they'll occur. People often hit certain obstacles when trying to develop pure thinking. Let's address them. My mind is too chaotic. Of course it is. Everyone's is at first. That's like saying, I can't learn piano because my fingers don't know where to go. The chaos reduces with practice. I can't tell if I'm thinking purely or just my opinions. Good. That awareness is the first step. Keep observing. You'll start to feel the difference between thoughts that have necessity in them versus thoughts that are just personal preference. This seems cold and intellectual. That's because you're still thinking about pure thinking rather than doing it. When you actually engage in it, it's the opposite of cold. It's the most intimate, creative, living activity possible. I don't see how this relates to spiritual development. Remember, in Steiner's view, clear thinking is spiritual development. You're literally strengthening your capacity to participate in universal truth. What could be more spiritual than that? As you develop this capacity, you start to notice something profound. The laws of thinking aren't arbitrary human conventions, they're the same laws that govern nature. The logic that says if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, that's not just a rule humans made up. That's the same lawfulness that makes chemical reactions predictable, that keeps the planets in their orbits, that allows DNA to replicate accurately. When you think purely, you're not just using your mind. You're participating in the world mind, the logos, the rational structure of reality itself. This is why mathematical discoveries can predict physical phenomena. This is why logical thinking can reveal truths about the world. You begin to experience thinking not as something you do, but as something that happens through you when you create the right conditions. Just as a properly tuned radio receives signals that are already there, a properly prepared consciousness receives truths that are already there. The philosophy of freedom was just the beginning for Steiner. Once he established that we can know truth directly through thinking, he spent the rest of his life exploring where this capacity could lead. He developed a whole science of the spirit, showing how the same rigorous thinking that works in mathematics and logic can be applied to questions of consciousness, life after death, human development, education, agriculture, medicine, and social organization. But it all starts with this fundamental insight. In thinking, we have access to the spiritual world, not through vague feelings or blind faith, but through the clearest, most precise activity we're capable of. He showed that the split between science and spirituality is false. True science, pursued deeply enough, becomes spiritual. True spirituality, pursued clearly enough, becomes scientific. They meet in the human being who has developed the capacity for pure thinking. Rudolf Steiner didn't just add another position to an old philosophical debate. He showed us where to look to transcend the debate entirely. In the act of thinking, something you're doing right now as you understand these words, subject and object unite. The thinker and the thought are one. This isn't mysticism that asks you to abandon your critical faculties. It's not materialism that reduces you to a biological machine. It's not even idealism in the traditional sense that denies the reality of the physical world. It's the recognition that in our own conscious activity, we have access to the fundamental nature of reality. We are the universe becoming conscious of itself. We are evolution developing the capacity to understand evolution. We are nature developing the freedom to transcend natural necessity through understanding it. And that changes everything, because if we can develop this capacity, if we can strengthen our ability to think purely and intuitively, then we can know truth directly. We can act freely. We can love intelligently. We can become who we're meant to be. The question isn't whether this is true. You can verify it for yourself through your own thinking. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you develop this capacity? Will you take up the challenge of becoming truly free? The path is there. Steiner mapped it out, but only you can walk it, and it starts with paying attention to your own thinking, right here, right now. The revolution in consciousness that Steiner initiated is available to anyone willing to do the work. Are you? Thank you for joining us on this journey into the mysteries of consciousness and spiritual science. Your presence here means everything to us as we explore these profound questions together. If you'd like to support our ongoing research into the spiritual dimensions of reality, we offer meaningful ways to contribute through our website at thelira.com. You'll find philosophy-inspired clothing that carries deeper symbolism, along with carefully selected crystals that support contemplative practice. Every contribution helps us continue this work of translating ancient wisdom for modern seekers. Whether you're just beginning to question the nature of reality or you've been walking this path for years, we're grateful to have you as part of our community. Until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and remember, the path of development is always unfolding.